They said I was going to die today. Len Jackson whispered, staring at the cold concrete wall of his death row cell. All I asked was to see my dog just once. He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't beg for mercy, only one final request to look into the eyes of the German shepherd who once made him feel human. But what began as a condemned man's last wish spiraled into a revelation that would tear apart courtrooms, destroy careers, and unearth a truth buried by greed, silence, and corruption. This isn't just a story about injustice. It's about the love of a dog that refused to forget, a woman who never stopped fighting, and a broken detective who dared to admit he was wrong. This is the story of a man they tried to silence. But loyalty barked louder. Stay with us until the end, because sometimes it takes the pure heart of an animal to reveal what justice tried to erase. Gray light slanted through the narrow slit of a window high above the ground, casting a frail beam across the steel floor of Ironwood State Prison's final wing, the corridor no inmate ever returned from. Leonard Len Jackson lay motionless on the thin mattress of his solitary cell, his wrists and ankles shackled, not for safety, but to remind him his journey ended here. The cement walls surrounding him were chipped and silent. Sickly institutional blue, a single exposed bulb flickered above his head, buzzing softly like a tired heart on the verge of giving up. Outside the heavy door, the steady rhythm of guards' boots on concrete echoed like a metronome counting down his final hours. Len's eyes were open, but unfocused. He hadn't truly slept in days. What was the point? Every moment blurred into the next until the hour would arrive. The hour when they would come for him, escort him down the corridor, and tie him to a gurney. Then, silence, permanent. But amid the haze of dread and the suffocating stillness, one thought burned brighter than the rest. Not about the crime he swore he never committed. Not about the trial that tore apart his life. Not even about death. It was simpler, purer. I want to see Eclipse before I die. His voice cracked when he spoke the name. Even in a whisper. He'd repeated that sentence so many times that the guards stopped responding. But it wasn't for them. It was for himself to keep something human alive inside him. Eclipse, his German shepherd, his companion, his sanity. Len had rescued her 3 years before the nightmare began. But truth be told, she had rescued him first. She wasn't just a dog, she was family. When the world turned its back on him, she stayed. When the police took him away in handcuffs, she barked and howled until she was pulled from the apartment. That was the last time they saw each other. He'd thought about her every day since. How her icy blue eyes sparkled in the sun. The way she used to nuzzle his chest after a long day. The warmth of her fur, the joy in her tail, the truth in her silence. Just one more time, he murmured again. More to the walls than the guard. Just, let me see her again. Moments later, a shadow appeared at the barred door. It was Warden Mara Batista. Stern posture, clipped steps, but eyes that had seen too many men walk the Green Mile. She looked at him without judgment. Jackson, she said, voice firm but not unkind. Final requests go through protocol. You know that animals aren't permitted on prison grounds. Len sat up slowly, the chains around his limbs clinking like broken promises. I know, but Eclipse, she's with Helen Griggs, my fiancée. Or she was, please, if there's any mercy left in this place, let me see her. There was no desperation in his voice, only raw, aching humanity. The warden hesitated, then nodded slowly. I'll see what I can do, but don't get your hopes up. Len smiled faintly, not because he believed her, but because, for a fleeting second, someone had listened, hundreds of miles away, just as the horizon began to warm with dawn's earliest blush. Helen Griggs sat alone in her dimly lit kitchen, the bitter scent of black coffee clinging to the air. She hadn't slept, not since she saw the news execution scheduled for 9 a.m., words that had shattered her breath and reignited a pain she thought she'd buried. At her feet, Eclipse lay curled on his dog bed, older now, his once sleek coat now dusted with white around the muzzle. Yet when Helen shifted in her chair, the German shepherd perked up, ears twitching, nose lifting ever alert to her sorrow. Eclipse hadn't seen Len since the day he was taken, but Helen knew so did Eclipse that a part of them was missing. That morning, Helen stood slowly and walked to the window, the soft clink of Eclipse's collar echoing behind her. She placed a trembling hand on the cold glass. The world outside felt still, holding its breath. You miss him, don't you? She whispered, crouching beside the dog and pressing her forehead gently to his. He never stopped loving you. He never stopped loving either of us. Memories swirled like ghosts, the engagement ring that still sat in her jewelry box. The wedding invitations she never had the heart to throw away. The apartment they never moved into because that one night had shattered everything. The police had stormed in. Len had been found near the scene, and just like that, they said he was a murderer. But Helen never believed it. Never. The evidence was weak. A partial fingerprint. Testimony from people who couldn't even agree on the timeline. Motive. Fabricated. Len had no reason to kill anyone. But the court believed otherwise. They always do when someone like Len is on trial, quiet, poor, and without power. For 5 years, she had written letters, called lawyers, and contacted journalists. Nothing worked. Len was still going to die. And now, the only thing he asked for his last request was to see Eclipse. As if the universe had waited until the final moment. The phone rang. Helen's hand flew to it. "Hello," she answered breathlessly. "Miss Griggs, this is Warden Batista from Ironwood Prison. I'm calling regarding Mr. Jackson's final request. He's asked to see his dog, Eclipse. We received conditional approval from the Department of Corrections. If you can bring the dog here within 90 minutes, we'll allow the visit." For a moment, Helen couldn't speak. Her knees buckled slightly. Eclipse stood beside her, tail beginning to wag, sensing the urgency in her voice. "Yes," she finally gasped. "We'll leave right now." She hung up, turned to Eclipse, and dropped to her knees. "We're going to see him. Boy, you ready?" The dog barked once, softly. As if understanding, Helen grabbed the leash, threw on her coat, and opened the front door. The morning air hit her like a wave of fear and hope intertwined. She helped Eclipse into the truck, shut the door, and gripped the wheels so tightly her knuckles whitened. As the engine roared to life, she whispered, "Hold on. Len, we're coming. Just hold on." The engine groaned as Helen's truck surged down the empty highway, headlights slicing through the early morning fog. The sky above was a dull canvas of gray, pierced only by the faint hues of sunrise bleeding across the horizon. Every second on the dashboard clock ticked louder than the last, each one a pulse against the edge of oblivion. Eclipse sat in the back seat, eyes wide, ears perked, occasionally letting out a low whine. He knew something was happening. Dogs always did. Helen's hands gripped the steering wheel like a lifeline. Her knuckles ached. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. In her mind, the countdown never stopped. 85 minutes, 84. "We can't be late," she murmured, half to herself, half to the heavens. The road stretched out before her like a gauntlet. Traffic lights turned green just as she approached small graces she clung to like omens. The town still slept. The world was still turning. But in her truck, the air was electric with urgency. She glanced in the rearview mirror. Eclipse met her eyes briefly, then looked away, resting his chin on the edge of the seat. "Just a little longer. Buddy," she whispered. "He's waiting for you." She thought about Len, what he must be feeling. Alone in that sterile death cell, staring down a clock that promised no future. She imagined him whispering Eclipse's name over and over, clinging to a memory in the face of silence. Her throat tightened. What if the warden changed her mind? What if traffic delayed them just enough? What if... She slammed the gas pedal. No more what ifs. Not today. She had already lost too much. Her phone buzzed once, twice. She ignored it. She knew what the messages would say. Friends pleading with her not to go, asking if she was okay, if it was worth the pain. But none of them had loved Len the way she had. None of them had held Eclipse while he whimpered in his sleep the first few nights after Len was taken. The prison loomed in the distance now, a grim fortress wrapped in barbed wire. Helen's stomach clenched. It looked like a place where hope went to die. She rolled down her window as the security checkpoint neared. A correctional officer stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "I'm here for Leonard Jackson's final request," she said, her voice trembling. "I brought his dog." The officer looked at Eclipse, at Helen, then back at the clipboard. A long pause. Then he nodded and motioned her forward. "Side entrance," he said. "We'll need a moment to confirm things inside. Wait in the vehicle." Helen exhaled shakily. "Thank you." As she parked, she reached back and stroked Eclipse's head. "We're here, baby," she whispered. "We're here. Just hold on." Eclipse pressed his muzzle into her palm, eyes gentle but alert. His breathing was steady, steadier than hers. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling. Then she glanced at the cold prison walls beyond the windshield. Somewhere in there, the man she loved was preparing to die, and all they had left to give each other was a few stolen minutes. Inside the heart of Ironwood Prison, the air was thin with tension. Time felt warped. The clock above the corridor ticked steadily. Indifferent to the weight of the moment, Leonard Jackson sat on the edge of his bunk, his ankles chained, his wrists marked by years of restraint. The final holding cell was sterile walls tiled in white, light too bright, everything too clean for a place where a man's life would be extinguished. A brown paper bag with his last meal rested unopened beside him. Cheeseburger, extra pickles, a soda. He hadn't ordered it for taste, but for memory. It reminded him of the day he and Helen adopted Eclipse, sitting on the hood of the car, feeding fries to the overexcited pup who kept trying to steal the burger. Len didn't touch the food. His stomach felt like stone. Instead, he cupped the soda in his hands, feeling the cold seep into his skin like the reality creeping closer with every breath. His mind was adrift in memory. Eclipse, God, how he loved that dog. The way she used to greet him at the door. The way she'd tilt her head when he said her name. Like she understood every syllable. 5 years without her had felt like a limb cut off. Did she still remember him? Would she recognize his voice? Would she be scared of how he looked now tired? Aged, broken. Len leaned back against the cold wall and let his thoughts flood him. There had been times, dark nights, when he'd come close to giving up. When the silence of the cell felt louder than screams. But it was the thought of Eclipse, waiting somewhere, still wagging her tail for him, that held him together. That and Helen's face. And yet, even now, as the minutes drained from his life, he didn't truly believe they'd come. Requests like his didn't get granted. Not for men like him. He shut his eyes, whispering her name one more time. Eclipse! The clank of boots outside the cell jolted him. A pause, then the mechanical click of the door unlocking. His heart slammed into his ribs. The door creaked open. Warden Batista entered, her posture firm, but her eyes softer than usual. Behind her, tethered to a leash, Eclipse. The German shepherd froze for a heartbeat. Then something exploded in her eyes, recognition. With a yelp that was half bark, half sob, she lunged forward. Her nails clicked furiously on the tile as she scrambled to reach him. Eclipse. Len choked out, dropping to his knees. She crashed into him like a wave, tail a blur, paws frantically pawing at his chest. She let out that familiar, strange cry somewhere between joy and desperation that only Len had ever heard from her. He buried his face into her fur, inhaling her scent, sobbing into the only creature who had loved him through it all. His hands shook as he held her, but they didn't let go. Behind them, the warden and guards stood still, silent, reverent. I told you she'd remember, Len whispered into her ear. And in that moment, for the first time in 5 years, Leonard Jackson didn't feel like a condemned man. He felt like someone who mattered. Time stopped. In that narrow room where lives ended quietly, something miraculous had broken through the sterile air, love. Pure and urgent, pulsing in every beat of Eclipse's tail, every tremor of Len's shoulders. The big German shepherd pressed her body into his chest, as if to make up for the 5 years they had lost. Len clutched her with trembling hands, his face buried in the warm, familiar fur he had imagined so many nights. The smell of her, the weight of her body, the feel of her paws tapping frantically against his chest. It was overwhelming. "Hey, girl," he whispered hoarsely, voice cracking like a fragile thread stretched too thin. "You got big," she barked softly, then licked his tear-streaked face again and again, whining between each breath as if trying to speak. Helen stood in the doorway, barely able to breathe. Her legs shook, her vision blurred. Her chest ached with unshed grief and gratitude all at once. The last time she had seen Len in person, he was in cuffs, being dragged away. Now she saw a man crumbling in joy, collapsing into a reunion that was too short, too stolen but impossibly real. "Helen?" Len said through tears, his eyes meeting hers across the room. He couldn't say anything else. He didn't have to. In that single look was everything. "I remember. I still love you. I'm sorry for everything you've suffered." She stepped forward slowly, kneeling beside him and Eclipse. Her hand found Len's. "I tried," she whispered. "I never stopped trying. I begged them to look again. I wrote letters to everyone. No one cared. No one listened. You did more than anyone," Len murmured, gripping her hand like an anchor. Warden Batista, standing nearby, cleared her throat gently. "You have 15 minutes, she said, voice softer than Helen had ever heard it. "Then the chaplain will come, and the medical staff after that." Len nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Thank you for this." Helen didn't move. She sat beside Len, one hand stroking Eclipse's head as the dog nestled into the space between them. Len leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers. For a moment, the room fell away, the fluorescent lights, the security cameras, the ticking clock above them. All that existed were two souls trying to hold on, and a dog who had waited for them both. "He's still yours," Helen said softly, eyes wet. "I never gave him away, no matter how many people told me to let go." Len broke then, burying his face in Eclipse's fur once more, the sobs racking his chest. "You kept us together," he whispered. "You saved a piece of me." In the corner, one of the guards looked away, blinking fast. Even in a place built for endings, something unbreakable had bloomed. Elsewhere in the quiet suburbs of Redwood City, Anton Delocqua adjusted the knot of his tie in front of a bathroom mirror that reflected more regret than resolve. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, his hazel eyes tired, burdened by years of secrets that never quite let him rest. For 3 decades, he had been a detective praised, promoted, respected. But in the stillness of retirement, knocking on his door, one case wouldn't let him go. Leonard Jackson, a man he had put on death row. Back then, it had felt clean. Partial fingerprints on a weapon, a suspicious deposit in the suspect's bank account, witnesses flimsy, yes, but willing to testify. Everything pointed to guilt, or at least it was made to. For the last 2 years, however, Anton had been unraveling a thread he should have pulled on long ago. His former partner had confessed doubt. Something was off, the man had said. The victim's background disappeared. Some of the testimonies were too perfect, like they were rehearsed. It gnawed at Anton. Night after night, he sat awake, rereading transcripts, watching Len's interrogation videos. There was no confession, just a man who looked scared and confused, saying over and over again, "I didn't do this." Anton had seen killers fake innocence, seen crocodile tears, but Len's calm, his quiet devastation, it didn't fit. This morning, Anton stood over a prepaid phone, an old-school burner purchased for privacy. He dialed a number by memory. 1 ring, 2, then, "Yeah." A gruff voice answered. "It's Delocqua," Anton said. "I need you to look into something for me, fast. Digital traces. We might be running out of time." He sent the files, case notes, financial data, surveillance gaps. He needed something, anything that could crack the wall. Maybe it was too late. But if Len was innocent and Anton had done nothing, then he was just as guilty as the ones who had buried the truth. As the files were uploaded, Anton slid a pistol into the holster beneath his coat, not because he expected trouble, but because he no longer trusted the system that once praised him. Driving through the gray morning, the courthouse just ahead, he muttered to himself, "If I can't save him, I'll damn well make sure they know someone tried." His phone buzzed. A text. "Got the files? Give me an hour." Anton replied immediately. "You have 45 minutes. Execution's at 9. He didn't wait for a response. He pressed the gas harder. Outside, the city yawned into the day. Inside Anton's chest, a war raged between duty and conscience, truth and too much time wasted. But one thing he knew, if Len Jackson died and was innocent, his own name would be cursed alongside those who'd let it happen. And maybe it deserved to be. Anton sat in his car outside the county courthouse, laptop balanced on his knees, the glow of the screen casting sharp lines across his face. A public library's Wi-Fi bled into the lot quiet, discreet, perfect for what he needed. His hands moved with urgency, dragging old files from a hidden flash drive, uploading them to his contact. Outside, the sky was brightening, but inside Anton's chest, only dread grew. This wasn't just about one man anymore. This was about a machine one that devoured truth when it became inconvenient. Len Jackson's trial had been publicized, sanitized, and weaponized. The man he helped convict had been framed. Anton could feel it now, like a splinter under his skin. And if he didn't stop the execution, he would be complicit in killing him. His phone buzzed. A message lit up. Received. Working. Wait for the update. Anton checked the time. Even. Just over an hour remained. He started the car, heading for Ironwood. If a miracle didn't arrive in the next 60 minutes, then he would go straight to the warden and demand the injection, be paused evidence or not. But just before pulling away, another text came through. Preliminary findings. Consincade's accounts show masked transactions days before his death. Shell corporations. Movement of large sums. Name flagged. Walton Green. Anton's stomach flipped. Walton Green, the fixer, known for staging scenes, planting evidence, gone underground years ago, never mentioned in Len's trial, never investigated. Anton called his contact. Where was Green the night of the murder? Working on it, the voice replied. But these bank movements, it's bad. This looks like a setup. Anton ended the call and immediately messaged Warden Batista. Need to speak? Critical new lead, possibly exculpatory. He didn't wait for a reply. He sped toward the prison, fingers white against the steering wheel. Behind him, a storm was forming, and in front of him, if the system listened. If fate showed mercy, there might still be time to stop a man from dying for a crime he didn't commit. Len sat hunched on the narrow bunk. Eclipse curled protectively beside him, the quiet hum of the fluorescent light above, echoing like a countdown in his ears. 15 minutes had passed since Helen and the guards left the room. He thought he'd cried himself dry, but every time he looked into Eclipse's eyes, more emotion surged like an ocean tearing through a dam. Then came the knock. Soft, too soft for the moment. It carried, the cell door opened, and Warden Batista stepped inside, her face unreadable. Behind her, Chaplain Morris paused, sensing something had shifted. "Mr. Jackson," the warden said gently, "we've received new information. It could call into question your involvement in Consincade's murder." Len's breath caught. He froze. What does that mean? It means the governor has issued a temporary stay of execution. 2 hours, effective immediately. We have to verify the new findings before any irreversible action is taken. For a long moment, Len couldn't speak. He glanced at Morris, who blinked as if in prayer, answered too soon to believe. "You're serious?" Len asked, voice barely above a whisper. Batista nodded. "We don't have proof of innocence yet, but we now have reason to believe your conviction may have been based on manipulated or incomplete evidence. Detective DeLocqua is helping with the review." Len's hands trembled. He didn't know whether to cry again or collapse. He reached for Eclipse, who instinctively pressed closer. 2 hours, Len muttered. "That's all I need." Morris stepped forward, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "Leonard, this could be the miracle we prayed for. I didn't let myself hope." Len admitted, "Because if it fell apart, I wouldn't survive it." Batista's voice turned firmer. "You'll remain here under observation. If the evidence proves credible, the governor may grant a formal stay, or even initiate a full investigation." Then she paused, her gaze softening. "And for the record, I hope it does." As she turned to leave, another guard entered quietly and handed Len a paper cup of water. Len sipped slowly, his body still catching up to the storm in his mind. Beside him, Eclipse lay his head on Len's knee, silent and still, for the first time in 5 years. Len looked at the clock, and it didn't feel like a noose. It felt like a lifeline. In the warden's office, a storm was gathering quiet, tense, and volatile. Detective Anton DeLocqua paced the room, his phone clutched tight, sweat beading beneath his collar despite the air conditioning. Helen sat nearby, stiff with anxiety, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were bone white. Across from them, Warden Batista spoke into the phone with clipped urgency. "Yes, Governor's legal office. We have new digital traces linking a suspect named Walton Green to the vicinity of the victim's penthouse the night of the murder. I'm requesting immediate consideration for a formal stay." Her voice was firm, but her face betrayed the weight of what was unfolding. The door burst open. Thomas Jorger, assistant district attorney, entered with the force of a man used to control until today. His face was pale, jaw tight, eyes darting across the room. "I was told new evidence is threatening this case. I want to see it myself," he snapped. DeLocqua turned slowly. "You prosecuted Jackson," he said calmly. "If you'd looked deeper 5 years ago, you might have seen this coming." "Spare me the lectures," Jorger shot back. This was a closed case. Partial prints, eyewitnesses, circumstantial and coached. DeLocqua countered, "We now have financial record shell corporations, concealed transactions pointing to a paid hit. Walton Green is involved. He's a professional fixer. He was within a mile of Consincade's penthouse the night he died." Helen stood up, her voice quaking but resolute. "That man you helped put on death row is innocent, and if you don't help stop this, you'll be responsible for killing him." Jorger's mask cracked. Just slightly, he turned to Batista. "Do you have proof Green was at the scene? Before she could answer, Batista's office phone rang again. She grabbed it, listening intently. Her eyes widened. Understood. Hold the line. She turned to the room. We just got a location ping. Green's burner phone was active near the victim's residence at 11. Thanks to the ORF. Oh, the suspected time of death. The silence that followed was deafening. Delocqua exhaled slowly. Helen covered her mouth, eyes filling. Jorger muttered, "That doesn't prove he killed Consincade, but it proves Len didn't act alone, or that he wasn't involved at all." Batista said, "And that's more than reasonable doubt." Batista dialed again this time. "To the governor's legal counsel, we have verified digital evidence suggesting potential wrongful conviction. Requesting emergency 48-hour stay pending deeper investigation." A beat. 2. Then she nodded, eyes closing briefly. "Confirmed. 48-hour stay granted." Helen collapsed into her chair, sobbing silently. Delocqua leaned back, eyes to the ceiling. Jorger looked stunned. The truth had broken through the cracks. And the machine, flawed, stubborn, but still capable of stopping, had paused its march toward execution. The courtroom was packed, but silent, like the eye of a storm just before it breaks. Every breath, every heartbeat seemed amplified as Judge Alvarez entered and took his seat, gavel resting like a sword on the edge of justice. Len Jackson stood at the defense table in a crisp, prison-issued uniform, his hands no longer shackled but still trembling. Beside him sat his new public defender, a young attorney with fire in his eyes and a file thick with truth in his hands. Across the aisle sat Assistant DA Jorger, paler than usual, hands clasped tightly, his once unshakable confidence eroded by the wave of truth that had overtaken his case. Behind him, Detective Delocqua and Warden Batista stood with quiet gravity. "We are gathered here on emergency grounds to assess newly uncovered evidence in the matter of Leonard Jackson versus the state." Judge Alvarez began. "Mr. Jorger, I understand you were the lead prosecutor in the original conviction. What do you have to say?" Jorger stood slowly, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, since the issuance of a 48-hour stay, significant evidence has come to light. A second, previously undisclosed forensic report indicates the presence of unidentified footprints at the scene, forced entry inconsistent with prior conclusions, and gunpowder residue unexplained by the weapon presented at trial. Additionally, digital location logs confirm the presence of a known fixer, Walton Green, near the crime scene during the estimated time of death. The state no longer has confidence in the original conviction." A gasp rippled through the room. Helen reached for Len's hand, squeezing it as tears welled. Len didn't move. He couldn't. The moment felt too big for breath. "Mr. Boucher?" The judge turned to the defense. "Do you have a motion?" Len's attorney rose. "We respectfully move to vacate the conviction and release Mr. Jackson immediately, pending a decision on whether the state wishes to retry him, but based on the evidence, it is our belief that no such grounds exist." Alvarez looked to Jorger. "Does the state oppose this motion?" The room held its breath. Jorger hesitated, then shook his head. "No, Your Honor. The state will not oppose." The judge nodded solemnly. "Then, in light of material flaws, procedural misconduct, and the emergence of credible doubt, the conviction of Leonard Jackson is hereby vacated." The gavel came down. One sharp crack, and everything changed. Helen broke down in tears. Delocqua closed his eyes, his jaw tight with relief. Len just stood there, as if his body hadn't caught up with the moment. Then he turned, slowly, and embraced Helen. For 5 years, he had been a number, a headline, a file. Now, he was a free man. The courthouse doors swung open, and sunlight poured down like a long-denied blessing. Len stepped into it slowly, as though afraid the moment would vanish if he moved too fast. His prison-issued shoes tapped softly against the courthouse steps. Each sound felt surreal. Each breath tasted like a foreign luxury. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted, but their noise faded when Len spotted Eclipse in the back of Helen's pickup truck, tail slamming against the seat in joyful recognition. "Go eat," Helen whispered, barely containing her own tears. Len didn't need to be told twice. He descended the stairs and dropped to his knees just as Eclipse bounded toward him, leash trailing, fur flying. The dog crashed into his chest like a storm of joy. Len let out a cry, a sound between a sob and a laugh, as he buried his face into that familiar coat. Around them, the world roared with attention. But in that sacred moment, there were only two souls reunited at last. Later, In the quiet of Helen's modest home on the edge of Redwood City, Len sat on the couch with Eclipse's head resting in his lap. The TV was off. The reporters had been turned away. The lawyer's calls are unanswered. He didn't want noise. He wanted air. He wanted time. But most of all, he wanted to remember how to live again. The walls were filled with pieces of the life he'd lost, framed photos, half-packed boxes, letters from a world that moved on without him. Helen came into the room with a blanket and sat beside him. "You're home," she said gently. "Whatever you need, we'll figure it out." Len nodded slowly, then looked down at his hands. He still bore the marks of cuffs. He still jumped at loud sounds. The prison hadn't just taken his freedom. It had carved into his mind. "I don't know how to be normal anymore," he admitted. Helen didn't speak. She just placed her hand over his. "We don't need normal. We just need time." Outside, a breeze stirred the leaves. Eclipse let out a quiet sigh and blinked up at Len with those same loyal eyes that had never once wavered. Freedom had come, but it brought its own battles. 2 weeks after Len's release, Redwood City was no longer the same. The headlines had shifted from sensational to scandalous. Wrongful execution averted. Fixer, Walton Green, arrested. And now, 3 prominent businessmen indicted in murder frame up. But for Len, justice wasn't in the papers. It was in the quiet, relentless work still being done behind the scenes. Detective Anton Delocqua stood at the front of a press conference. A man transformed not just by the truth he uncovered, but by the weight of what he'd once ignored. "We now have conclusive evidence that Raymond Consincade was murdered on the orders of his business partners after threatening to expose widespread corruption. Leonard Jackson was chosen as the scapegoat because he had the misfortune of proximity, and a knife was stolen weeks prior. Walton Green, a hired fixer, planted the evidence, and yes, key forensic reports were withheld during the trial. That will be investigated separately." Len watched it all unfold from the couch. Eclipse curled beside him. His name had been cleared, but the hole inside remained. He would never get back those 5 years. The birthdays were missed. The Christmases were spent staring at a cold wall. The freedom that had to be begged for. Helen entered quietly with coffee and knelt beside him. "They arrested them this morning," she said softly. "Green made a deal. He gave them names, documents, everything." Len nodded slowly. "They'll face trial." "Yes," she replied. "And this time, it's the right people in the defendant's chair." Later that week, Len was invited to speak at a public hearing on wrongful convictions. The courtroom where he had once been condemned now welcomed him with respect. Standing in front of the judge's bench, wearing a borrowed suit and trembling slightly, he said only this: "I was buried alive, not just by a system, but by silence. I was called guilty because it was easier than asking the right questions. If you want to honor justice, don't just correct my case, prevent the next one, because I'm not the only one." The audience stood and clapped, but Len didn't smile. He stepped off the podium, straight into Helen's arms. Outside, Eclipse waited tail wagging, tongue lolling, ever patient. And as the sun set behind Redwood Creek, casting golden light on a city finally facing its ghosts, Leonard Jackson took a breath of air, not as a victim, but as a survivor. Freedom didn't come with instructions. It didn't come with a map or a manual on how to rebuild what was shattered. It came quietly, with the weight of memory pressing on every step. For Len, mornings were the hardest. He would wake before sunrise, heart racing, eyes darting to the ceiling as if expecting iron bars. Sometimes he still reached for the wall, out of habit, to knock a signal for guards he no longer had to answer to. Eclipse would nudge him gently, anchoring him to the present. That was their new ritual. The dog who once waited 5 years was now the one teaching Len how to start again. Helen had cleared a room in her house, made it Len's space. It was small, simple, just a bed, a desk, and a window that opened wide to the morning sun. At first, he didn't know what to do with it. For days, he just sat in the chair, staring out, watching life go by. He had missed so much. Children who were toddlers when he was arrested were now walking to school. Shops had changed. Friends had moved. Even his own reflection in the mirror felt foreign. One evening, he found a box Helen had kept. Inside were the letters she'd written to him, dozens of them. Most never sent, some were angry, some were heartbreakingly hopeful. All of them loved him. He read them slowly, hands shaking, tears falling silently onto pages that had waited years to be seen. Therapy sessions followed. Not easy, not magical, but necessary. Len spoke of the noise of death row, the silence that screamed louder, the guilt of surviving while others didn't. He confessed to the crushing fear of falling asleep and waking up in the past. But alongside the darkness came flickers of healing, walks with Eclipse at dusk, laughter with Helen over coffee, the smell of rain through an open window. Small things. But to Len, they were signs that life hadn't closed the door on him completely. One morning, Helen placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a letter from the State Compensation Board. The figure inside was staggering a formal offer for the years wrongfully taken. Len stared at it for a long time. "It won't fix anything," he said. Helen nodded. "No, but it might help you start something new." He folded the paper and looked at her. "Then let's do something that matters." The next day, Leonard Jackson filed paperwork to establish a foundation. The Eclipse Project, a legal and psychological support network for the wrongfully convicted. Its mission would be simple: help others survive what he barely did. Word spread quickly. The man who had once been chained for a crime he didn't commit was now building something no prison could contain. A beacon for others still trapped in silence. The Eclipse Project launched quietly, without ceremony or headlines. It didn't need noise. It needed action. Len converted an old community center into a modest headquarters. The walls were bare at first, but soon they were covered in case files, court documents, and photographs of people whose stories echoed his own men and women who had been forgotten, buried under false confessions, fabricated evidence, and rushed convictions. Helen handled the legal correspondence. Delocqua offered his connections, sometimes even his own time, reviewing transcripts, advising attorneys, and testifying when needed. Eclipse, the namesake of the entire mission, often sat at the front door like a guardian, his calm presence reminding every visitor what this place was truly built on: loyalty, survival, and belief in redemption. The first case they took was a 19-year-old boy imprisoned for armed robbery. No weapon was ever found. His alibi, a late-night shift at a diner, had been dismissed. Len sat with him during a prison visit, holding nothing but a notepad and his own story. "They said I looked like the guy," the boy whispered. "That's all it took." Len nodded. "That's all it took for me." 2. The team filed motions. They found discrepancies, camera footage, a time card buried in a manager's drawer. Within months, the boy was free. Then came a young mother accused of smothering her child, despite lacking motive, evidence, or history of abuse. A fireman was wrongfully blamed for arson. A migrant worker was framed for assault. One by one, the Eclipse Project peeled back the lies that had wrapped themselves in legal formality. But it wasn't just about exoneration. It was about rebuilding. Len made sure every exoneree left with therapy sessions, job placement, and when needed a place to stay. He knew what it meant to step into a world that no longer recognized you. He had lived that disorientation, that fear. At night, when the center went quiet and only the hum of the heater remained, Len would walk the halls with Eclipse beside him. He'd look at the wall of names, some freed, some still waiting, and whisper to them, "You're not invisible. Not anymore." What had started as a final wish to see his dog one last time had turned into a revolution built on silent promises. Len had been robbed of 5 years. But now, in the darkness that once consumed him, he carried light for others, and he would keep going until the forgotten were found. The sun dipped low over Redwood Creek, casting golden streaks across the walking trail where it had all once begun. Len stood still for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, Eclipse by his side, tail swishing in gentle rhythm. The breeze rustled through the leaves like a memory returning home. Helen approached quietly, her hand finding his without a word, and together they began walking, just as they had in the life they once imagined but never got to live. This was the first time in 5 years that the world didn't feel like borrowed time. Every footstep forward was no longer a miracle, it was a choice. The city was still unraveling. Politicians resigned, prosecutors faced hearings, more buried cases began to resurface. And yet, none of that chaos touched this moment. Len wasn't the symbol anymore. He was just a man walking with the woman he loved and the dog who had waited for him through it all. Up ahead, a boy and his father threw stones into the creek. Len watched them with a flicker of sadness, but no bitterness. The ache remained, but it had stopped bleeding. As they walked, Helen leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "You never stop being good." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Instead, he looked down at Eclipse, then toward the winding trail, and thought of the people still waiting in prison cells for someone to believe in them. The Eclipse Project was growing more volunteers, more lawyers, more names scrawled on walls of hope. and in every freed face, Len saw a version of himself once lost. As they reached the end of the trail, the setting sun threw long shadows behind them. But Len didn't look back. He only whispered, "Come on, boys," and Eclipse bounded forward, the symbol of everything they had endured and everything they now stood for, with Helen's hand in his and the path stretching ahead. Leonard Jackson walked on, not as a victim of injustice, but as the one who turned his sentence into salvation. Leonard Jackson walked out of prison not just as a free man, but as proof that even in the darkest systems, light can still break through. It wasn't a lawyer or a politician who saved him first. It was a dog. A bond forged in loyalty, a love that never let go. And today, thanks to Len, Helen, and the Eclipse Project, others wrongfully silenced are finally being heard. Because justice isn't justice until it reaches the forgotten. If this story moved you, share it. Leave a comment below. What would your final wish be? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us at Storyflow, where real stories, real emotions, and second chances come to life. Together, we carry the truth forward, one voice, one step, one light at a time.